How to Poison a Planet.
Oh.
And so all of the guys that did Dark Water, all the attorneys,
Wow.
they were all there. And then Mark Ruffalo showed up and the whole crew. And I was so bummed because I have a book that I wanted to give you. I wrote a book called Fatal Conveniences.
Geez, I've got to get that for sure. Thank you.
I thought I had them back, and then of course I didn't. But I got into, my dad suffered multiple chemical sensitivity in the 90s while I was studying nutrition and physiology. And I thought he was nuts, and of course he wasn't. Mm-hmm. And then 30 years later, I wrote a book kind of dedicated to that.
Wow.
But so
did he have neurological symptoms or
kind of brain fogged?
Yeah.
He couldn't think, and he was a professor at the University of Minnesota.
Oh my word!
So you can imagine you high functioning, and all of a sudden, I get this call, and so that started the journey of the modern world kind of issues, and so PFAS got on my radar pretty hard, and so the filmmaker reached out. So we went out there and saw it, and it was one of those things where they were ready to take down 3M because of the hidden stuff that they actually knew in '74 that it was in the blood of everybody.
Yeah.
And they
it wasn't going away.
It wasn't going away in the environment and in bodies. So so I jumped out there to support that because since 3M settled, they weren't able to hammer him in court. So this film actually became an extension of what the attorneys really want out there. Yeah. Right? 30, you would appreciate this, 30 million pieces of document.
Oh, my word.
That they went through.
Oh, my word. And this is before the days of AI.
Yeah.
So, wow.
Yeah. And they had to siphon through all of this stuff.
Wow.
And they found several smoking guns of, deniabilities, and anyway, it's... So
this was kind of like an event that was celebrating the film, or
yeah, we watched the film, and then they did a panel after. So anyway, that was my New York, and as soon as I realized that was done, I had nothing else. I took off.
Yeah, so what they say is New York is great to visit, and you're glad you don't live there.
I literally don't know how.
Yeah.
We look at all these things. But anyway, I'm so grateful to have. I feel like I should have met you in the last 20 years.
Well, that's how I feel too. And looking at your stuff, and that's the exciting thing for me in this kind of new role I find myself is I'm meeting people I should have met long ago. And so, thank you. This is a real treat.
It's equally because really that fathering of food as medicine and functional medicine was really kind of something that you brought to the world and now is in the lexicon.
It's surprising. It kind of is. I don't think it's necessarily jumped into common parlance, but in the certain health conscious consumers, it has gotten to recognition.
So what do you think from your perspective? I'd love to hear this. What is the definition of functional medicine from your vantage point at this point?
So I think there are two kinds of definitions. One is a definition of the scope and scale of the landscape of functional medicine, and the other is a definition of what it specifically does. I like to kind of take the highbrow approach when I define it as to what the scope and scale of the landscape is. And the formation of functional medicine was built around the precept that what we call ill health or chronic disease is really a manifestation of change in our body's function. And therefore, functional medicine is less worried about what you call what you are, more concerned about how you got there and what are the things that are influencing your function. And I think there are 4 kinds of function that people have in their daily lives. One is their physical function, muscles, bones, ligaments, tendons, movement. The second is their metabolic function, which are all these geeky things about metabolic conversion of food to energy. And then the third is our cognitive function, how we see and act in the world and process information. And then the fourth is our behavioral or psychological or spiritual function, which is this kind of thing that drives us to be a human being. And when you put those four things together, that defines our health. And then I got asking myself years ago, where in medicine do we have a place where that is actually discussed, described, or considered important? What do we teach doctors in their training to address any one of those or all four of those conditions rather than just driving for a diagnosis? And when we drive for a diagnosis, obviously we're driving for something that is discrete that we can hold on to that triggers a reimbursement code.
Yeah.
So it's a way of tailorizing or streamlining medicine into a discrete set of buckets that then gives you a way of saying, well, for that service, I need to be paid the following amount, versus really looking at upstream health. So functional medicine to me is really addressing the upstream or root cause that gives rise to the downstream effects that we see later as disease-related disease.
Yeah, it's beautifully said. And it's like the alarming thing as you're talking is like this systems approach, looking at the body as a system and multiple systems and as they all relate, as opposed to the reductionism of it reducing down to a definition of something, whereas it has no looking past that into how this manifested.
Precisely. And you know, your work, as I kind of have reviewed it, I'm going to probably, I hope I'm not trivializing, I consider it actually very important. You talk about signals that the body receives from the environment, signals that our body has antennae that process. And those signals can come in as wonderful things that turn our genes on to be blissful, or things that our body has signals to say our body should be at risk of alarm, and so it needs to do battle, which is inflammation, which are the diseases of commonplace today. And there's so many of these signals that we put into our environment, 300,000 new chemicals that the body doesn't have familiarity with. And so the signals that come in are, ooh, what am I going to do with this? And maybe I need to mount a kind of response to it by defending against it, which is the body then becomes its own innocent bystander to its own response. And now we start injuring our own body from trying to defend against foreigners.
Yeah, and it's so wild because it's on the one hand, you have this argument that the modern medicine is the scientific medicine, right? But at the same time, you look at the modern world with these 300,000, largely chemicals spraying in our environment from air, water, food, clothing, you name it. And those are not tested, essentially. And none of them are tested as they interact with one another. And the challenging thing is, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because the challenge that we have is trying to educate the world in this, is that it's not like essentially an acute situation. If you get a paraben, a phthalate, a plastic, a plasticizer, a azo dye, a PFAS, just because you got that exposure, your body's so good, you don't acutely fall over and die. But then you look at all of this stuff added up over time, and you're like, how is it that we even... I'm astonished, even being on the plane and looking at people, and like we were saying in New York, you're going, the body is just so resilient under just this onslaught, right? Because there's this path that we're racing down that is kind of reductionism, stay really busy, stressful, blah, blah, blah. And that's producing a result that's not ideal. And then there's this other side, if we get a little more conscious and bring in some sensibility and common sense and science into these areas of our lifestyle, kind of makes sense. But it's like we're dealing with this, where is the smoking gun when you have 300,000 of them?
Well, I think everything you said right there, that's almost like a drop the mic, because it's very, very complicated. If a person is killed by a gunshot, it's pretty easy to figure out exactly what their cause of death is. Yeah. If, however, a person dies by a slow 1,000 cuts as a consequence of signals that come in from the outside world, each which takes its own little small piece, it's really hard, even in a detective world of medicine, to understand that etiology, the cause. And so two fields that were developed just within the last 20 years that I think exemplify what you're talking about. One is called immunotoxicology, and the other is called neurotoxicology. And these are different than the traditional fields that studied poisons. So we know toxicology is the study of poisons, but these fields, neuro and immunotoxicology, are studying what are the low-level effects of small doses of substances that influence the functional capacity of the nervous and immune system. And it was really that kind of question that gave birth to us starting this new company that I never thought at my age I'd be starting another new company. But this thing, Big Bold Health, the company that we formed a few years ago, is really focused on trying to understand these things that are in our environment that influence our immune system, our nervous system, and how that translates into our function, how we look, act, and feel in the world. And when we started to do that, we recognized that this seemed like very commonplace, good idea, but no one was really doing that.
Yeah.
No one was studying at the level of functional immunological activity or functional neurological activity, well below acute toxicity, like you said, but still very real in the way it shapes a person's ability to think clearly, to operate from pain, energy levels, sleep, all these kind of chronic things that we're seeing, behavioral disorders, depression. They don't just happen mysteriously. There are things that are developing the architecture in our world, in our environment, in our relationships, that are creating those dysfunctions in our immune and nervous system, which are cross-talking, by the way. Our nervous system talks to our immune system talks to our nervous system. So what you're talking about is the secret sauce, is let's find a way, A, to lower the background noise on our body of those things, and B, an ability of the body to improve its resilience by utilizing processes we call it like immuno-rejuvenation, rejuvenating the immune system to be more resilient. So to me, that's the focus of my life here, is trying to understand this.
I love that. And there's so much there, and it's almost, as you're talking with all of these interactive challenges, like where do you be, like as you're building this company, like what's the foundation of things that you're building upon? Because it's almost overwhelming.
Yeah. It's
certainly when you start picking it apart, you can look at water. You can look at all of the debris in water from fluoride to now 50% of our population in the U.S. is getting their high doses of PFAS from the damn water. So municipalities aren't even close to getting this out. So just looking at one little thing and you peel it back, there's so much exposure and so much challenge, and then ultra-processed food and the stressful life. So when you're building your next adventure, how do you begin, and what is, from your certainly expert vantage point, what's that foundational place that you believe to start from?
Well, fortunately, in this period of time, we have some tools that we never had before that I think are really helpful in addressing the question you're talking about. So I don't want to get too geeky here, but I'll just try to summarize.
That's okay. So we can get geeky.
Okay, good. So I'm going to focus here on the immune system, but we could also talk about the nervous system it plays in. And the reason I'm focusing on the immune system is our immune system is very dynamic. Most people don't recognize it, but every 3 to 4 months, the cells in our body that are our immune cells turn over, so we have new ones. So we're constantly renewing our immune cells. So the question is, are they better, worse, or the same as the one they're replacing? And in general, as we have birthdays, they get worse. That's the general rule. Now, do they have to get worse? No, they don't have to get worse. It's not like time built in. It's the things we're exposed to. It's the things that encode bad experiences in our immune system that create then this process that we call immunosenescence, immune system getting older. So now, what tool do we have to look with some degree of precision as to how that immune system may be shaped by the experiences that we're exposed to? So we can look at the genes of the immune system, and we can use these new technologies, these gene chip technologies, to actually look at how the signals that a person is exposed to is marking their genes to create a different outcome. And it's a process called inflammaging. You've probably heard that term, that as we grow older and we collect these bad memories in our immune system genes, it then signals to the body that we're under stress, and it produces inflammatory response, because the immune system is the source of inflammatory processes. So what we have as a population, even younger people who are already in a state of chronic inflammaging, they're already on the burden of their body's genes being marked in such a way that it's creating these kinds of response as if you're under siege. Now, the good news is that once you measure that, which we can and have been doing, and in fact just published a clinical trial in subjects looking at what happens to their genes in their immune system as a consequence of their process of life, showing that there are these marks, these so-called epigenetic marks on their genes. We found that in 90 days of a person consuming a very high polyphenol-rich diet, that we're able to reverse some of those marks, change the patterning on their genes so that we were able to back off this inflammaging process, this aging of the immune system. In fact, the data said that there are certain people that who had more rapid aging of their immune cells as a consequence of their life, that we're able to lower it by 47% in 90 days. Wow. So now we have a tool, a measuring tool, and now we have an intervention tool, which is eating in the blue zone, and now we can measure the outcome in those individuals, and so it's kind of a good news story. It's not like just doom and gloom.
Right, and that's it kind of gives more, obviously, scientific data to say, just go eat, good food. Yeah. And people hear that, but yet they're also under siege to their own habits and their own lifestyle and their own kind of stressors, and sometimes which is great about science is it has an opportunity to kind of shake that up and bring the invisible visible, right? In the sense of what you're talking about. Yeah. And that's how do you I mean, from that trial of actually publishing the data, how do you scale something like that?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to just give a quick little story, because never in my life did I ever think at this age, I'm 79, I never thought at this age I would be involved with organic and rock certified regenerative agriculture and having farms in upstate New York. So it kind of happened that way. And so what happened was that we found that there was a certain food that actually was over about 3,500 years old, one of the oldest foods that people have been husbanding in the world. And it had a name that I didn't know anything about a few years ago. Now we consider ourselves experts, called Himalayan Tartary buckwheat. Now, what is Tartary buckwheat? Tartary stands for the Tartan district in China. So it's part of on the foothills of the Himalayan mountains. And it turns out that this food, which grew up in this very rough climate and rough area, that product, Tartary buckwheat, developed genes over periods of time that were very rugged, had a very good immune system. Mm-hmm. And the people that ate that were people that had really good immune systems, and they were very healthy. And for some reason, this plant food, which is, I said, over 3,500 years of history, never got translated into the Western world. It's kind of been over there as an Asian food. It's in Japan, it's in Korea, it's in China. It got into Eastern Europe. It kind of followed Marco Polo's trail early on into Eastern Europe. But it never got introduced into America. And so we started looking at this because it turned out that the nutrients that were present in that food, over 120 different immune-active nutrients. In fact, it's probably the most dense immune-active food that you could ever eat. Wow. And so we started to say, well, what is the principles that give rise to this? How does that relate to, the soil microbiome? Right. Should we steward the soil to make the plant more healthy, to give more of this when we eat it? It gives more benefit to our immune system. And lo and behold, we got a soil scientist that works for us, and now we do soil microbiome studies, and we find out if you feed the soil right to make it rich and have a good microbiome, that the plant then produces more of these immune-active ingredients. So there's a through line here that we start to recognize that a healthy planet gives rise to a healthy soil, which gives rise to a healthy plant, which gives rise to a healthy human. It's a duh. Yeah. But we're not dealing with that in our system right now, agriculturally or from a food perspective, nor how it translates into medicine. Mm-hmm. So what we finally started to do is to kind of deep drill into what are the active principles in this food. This is for the geeky world of people who want to know what's the mechanism. And what we find is that you can't value the benefit just one nutrient at a time. You can't say, oh, it has quercetin in it. Oh, it has hesperidin in it. Oh, it has rutin in it.
It's an orchestra.
That's right. Yeah. Thank you. That's the key. Nature is symphonic, and it requires all the players in the orchestra to give the full benefit. And I've asked a question. I said, if there was only one heavy lifting nutrient in that plant, why would it go to the trouble to make 120 plus different nutrients? Didn't have nothing better to do? Of course not. It makes that because that is a orchestration that produces an effect on the genes that regulate the immune system and the nervous system that ultimately produces resilience. Mm-hmm. And we've forgotten entirely that connection as we've developed our foods. We simplify it. We produce, all these fat, sugar, and salt-laden, colored, artificially flavored foods, thinking that, well, it's all food. It's protein, carbohydrate, and fat. But it's bringing an entirely different message to our body.
Well, that's the thing, too. And even in the nutrition world, we want to reduce it down.
Yes.
Right? We want to reduce it down to take that isolated ingredient, take that isolated. But nothing, I don't think, as well compares to that orchestration because I have so many questions around that because I spent 20 years running around the planet looking for botanicals and formulating with those. And I love that kind of discovery of like what has been sitting there all along, but usually getting from an indigenous person of like going, oh, what are we having for lunch? And then they're throwing in moringa or something like that. And you're going, what's moringa? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at all these incredible plants. So when you look at I love that adaptogenic quality that those plants are doing. And then this beautiful relationship, this homologous relationship between we're consuming that and that stress that it went through is helping us.
Yes.
Like that still blows me away.
I think you used a word there that to me is a really important word for us to have more familiarity with in our general population, adaptogen. Mm-hmm. So what is an adaptogen? So here's how I kind of simplifies it from my science geek perspective. So you can have substances that can activate a process in a cell, and you can have substances that deactivate. Let me use an example today. GLP-1 agonists. Right. So a GLP-1 agonist drug, Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, whatever, those drugs are activating a specific process in the body that is dependent upon this endocrine hormone called glucagon-like peptide 1, GLP-1. Mm-hmm. So that's an activation process. Then you might say, well, how about ibuprofen? Ibuprofen is an anti-inflammatory. How does it work? It deactivates, it blocks a process in the body. Now, those particular substances, the pharmaceutical GLP-1 activators, are so strong in the way they've been developed that they have only a one-way street. Right. They only activate. Right. Whereas the anti-inflammatory drugs have only one process, they deactivate. In nature, the molecules that we eat in our food or the herbal kingdom have dual personalities. Right. They can both activate and they can deactivate depending on what's needed. That's the adaptogen. Because they can adapt to the moment of need. So it can be an agonist, meaning activate, but in a case where you don't want to act, you want to actually lower function, then it can become a deactivator. Yeah. And so this concept of the knowledge of nature, the wisdom of nature, and how these molecules work. Now, you might say, well, that's all well and good, Jeff, but if I'm in the emergency room with a critical illness, do I want something that kind of is like confused about whether it should be an activator or a deactivator, or do I want to just go in there and pin that down? No, in that case, probably you want a drug that has one personality. Right. But if you're eating every day for years of living, you want to have the freedom of the body's ability to figure out what it needs at that moment to create the best outcome, which is what the molecules in food do. Right. So this natural diet approach and herbal medicine has a different philosophy that is rooted in the principle of nature, which is in complexity. The complexity gives rise to the ability for our body to have this resilience.
And we can barely understand the complexity of this system that we have. We're finding out, and the fact that we want to take a manufactured GLP-1 when you eat whole food and exercise, it turns on your natural GLP-1 receptors. So we jump over all of these steps.
You're saying it so beautifully. So 22 years ago, I published with my colleagues a study on GLP-1, 22 years ago. And what we found is that there were certain constituents within our diet that would activate GLP-1 in the body naturally. And those constituents turned out to have a bitter taste perception. And then when we studied that, what we found is that those substances in that food, like bitter melon or like hops, those substances that produce bitter actually activated in our intestinal tract a cell type called L cells. The L cells in our small intestine, on the surface of our L cells, were these receptors that would pick up that information from the food, those bittering molecules, and it would translate into the cell saying, produce GLP-1. So bitter produces GLP-1. And if you think of fundamental diets and people in blue zones and they eat the colored foods, natural substance, they're getting all sorts of tastes. They're not just getting sweet. They're getting all sorts of tastes that stimulate this proper orchestration. Now, what we found when we studied that in more detail is that GLP-1 that's produced naturally by eating the food that has that characteristic would stay in the blood only about a half an hour. And then there was something in the body that would actually deactivate it. It's an enzyme called DPP4, and the body produces that. So it has this rhythm, this balance. It produces it, stays around for half an hour, and then it gets rid of it. So then you ask the question, why would it go to the expense of making it, which is cost energy, and then get rid of it so quickly? Because it has the wisdom to know how to orchestrate this process relative to eating and function over time. Now, what are the GLP-1 agonist drugs? They're modifications of the natural process that allows that molecule to stick around in the blood for weeks, not just minutes. Now, is that the way the body has ever worked? No, it's not. So what does that potentially tell us? We don't know yet. We don't know what the effects will be of 40 million people taking GLP-1 agonist drugs in the United States in the next 10 years over long periods of time. So we do know it's different than what happens in natural physiology when we eat the proper diet that's going to make it and get rid of it, make it and get rid of it, because we're eating that message, and the body knows how to rhythmically manage the orchestra.
Yeah, and it goes back into that thing where we force the body into a particular way.
Yeah.
And don't really have consideration for the long-term effect, nor have we actually done enough studies to validate, but yet let's throw it on the market, let's throw it at a bunch of people, we'll deal with the ramifications later. And that stuff just makes me nuts. Like, it's,
yeah, I think that's a really good word, because there's this kind of induced mental fatigue right now of where is truth, where is honesty, where is veracity, where is enduring things that we won't come back later and say, oh, geez, I shouldn't have thought that, because now I'm learning something is not so good. Right. And I think that's where we are. Our environment is changing so rapidly, as you have eloquently discussed and focused on. And it's just like flooding our body with signals that it doesn't know what to do with. Right. And so we have to build our resilience. And, that has to do with things like, does the body have ways of eliminating these things? Well, that's the body's biotransformation or detoxification process. Does the detoxification process of our body, is it influenced at all by what we eat and where we live? And the answer is yes. And we now know the enzymes that break down and get rid of foreign molecules, these detoxification enzymes, are inducible. The body can be induced to produce the proper things to get rid of them if we eat and live the right way. If we eat ultra-processed foods, those enzymes don't get induced, and so our detox process goes down. Now when we're exposed to those chemicals, they're more likely to stick around.
Yeah, it becomes this... Yeah, I think the right word is resiliency, right? Our capacity to deal with stress, which is a part of life, right? Yes. There's good stressors, and there's, like you said, in the plants. Like I've been in the sovereign mountains of Tibet looking at rhodiola at 22,000 feet, and you're like going, oh, there you go. That's why it has those same compounds, the Himalayan buckwheat as well, right? It's in these situations, and that's where that beautiful orchestra gets to play with the body. But is there going back to the Ozempic, manufactured Ozempic, do you see from your perspective, do you see a place for it? Or are you, from your kind of vantage point of this, are you kind of afraid of what is going to happen, and maybe do you have a prediction of what could happen by this overuse of this GLP-1 activator?
So I would say yes to both your points there.
Yeah.
I think that there is a place for its use. We know that based upon the environment we're now living and the foods that we're eating, that this epidemic, and I would call it a pandemic of obesity, is present in our society. And we know that there are some people that have extra body fat that are very healthy. But the majority of people who have extra body fat, when they're particularly the central adiposity around our midsection, the interorgan fat, as it's called, those people have this thing I talked about earlier, this inflammaging. So they are accelerating their aging process because of the communication that fat is having to the rest of their body. In fact, I have a little analogy I use, or maybe it's a metaphor. I think of the body fat as being a signaling tissue or cell type for the rest of the body. So what happens is, if we eat junk, that information comes in, and where does it first get picked up, that information? It gets picked up by the microbiome in our intestinal tract, which then speaks directly to the cells of our intestinal tract, which are our immune cells. Two-thirds of our body's immune system is clustered around our intestinal tract. So now those immune cells pick up that information of foreigner on board, hostile, bad diet. That then translates to the next organ downstream, which is the liver. And the liver, about 10% of the liver is made up of immune cells, which are called Kupffer cells. So it picks up that message like a relay race. So it takes the baton saying, yikes, this is not so good. So it sends a message out into the blood to our immune cells, the macrophages and neutrophils and monocytes, the circulating white blood cells. And those go to all tissues of the body, and they go into our body fat. And so these cells reside into our body fat, and they say, you know, we've been eating stuff that really alarms me, and you should know about that fat cell. Right. So what does the fat cell do then? The fat cell produces its own inflammatory substance. It's called adipocytokines. Those go out of the blood to speak to the brain, the heart, the blood vessels, saying, yikes, we got really a fire here we need to do something about. Now the whole body is getting inflamed. So I call that that whole process, if you think about fat, that it is then signaling to the body that substances that we're exposed to are not good, that the body is responding to inappropriately or in an excited state. So that means that we would see body fat in part as a symbol, not just of cosmetic nature. It's a functional unit that is really telling our body to be in an alarm state of inflammation. So now you say, okay, so is there a place where Ozempic or Wegovy or these GLP-1 agonist drugs could be beneficial? If a person is in a state of jeopardy in which their lives are at risk as a consequence of these signals that are shouting at them about inflammation and about injury, and they've tried to be on a diet and they just have been unsuccessful, then I think it would be very selfish of us to say, no, you can't ever take those drugs. No, those drugs could be harmful. But simultaneously, as we're using those drugs, we need to be talking about lifestyle. Yes. We need to be talking about how do you get there? Can we keep this from recurring? Can we help you to eat foods that are going to support your proper body immune system function? And that then goes back to the food supply, and that goes back to agriculture. And then so all these things have to be kind of interwoven together for a solution.
Well, it's a great example of, hey, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
So maybe it's a great catalyst for someone who's is suffering and can't get out of it, and the body is challenged, and you're hyper palatable with everything. You're addicted to all that stuff, so you're barely able to get out of that at all, right? And you've tried it, and there's upside down. So maybe that application with the catalyst, but also here's the plan, right? Here's a good plan to work and turn on your natural systems again, and then get off of that thing.
That's exactly right. So the way I talk to this, people who are not really well understanding human physiology, I say that the fat can be angry. If you have angry fat, that's when the immune system is activated. So angry fat produces angry bodies, which is the color red, the god of war, Mars. That's inflammation. So you're in an inflammatory state when you have angry fat. So what you want to do is you want to make your fat friendly. So I use the analogy, I say, so we think of Santa Claus as being this kind of girth-rich guy, kind of looks like he's overweight, but he's smiling and laughing and carrying on because he has happy fat. But we could make a Santa Claus that had angry fat, and he wouldn't be smiling and laughing. So that construct of how body fat has a personality based upon its connection to our immune system and what we eat is a whole different paradigm about overweight than just lose weight because you'll get in a smaller pant size. And
so how do they have a conversation with their fat?
Yeah, and so they have a conversation with their fat through their immune system.
Yeah,
and you know, a good example of this that I've always used is the Pima Indians. So I don't know if you're familiar with them in Arizona. So the Pima Indians are genetically identical to the Tarahumara Indians that live in the Copper Mountains in Mexico. I mean, we separate the countries, but actually they were all contiguous earlier. And so you then might ask, what's the health effects or what is the health outcome of the Pima Indians in Arizona? And then what's the health outcomes of their genetic brethren in the Tarahumara Indians in Mexico on the other side of the border? Well, it turns out that in the Pima, in the reservations there, type 2 diabetes is almost a requirement after the age of 40. Yeah. Over 80% of the population, men and women, have diabetes of one form or another. It's if you want to study kidney failure, you want to study ocular injury, if you want to study any of the side effects of diabetes, you go to the Pima Indian Reservation. So people have said the poor Pimas, they have the genes that encode diabetes. They have diabetogenic genes. That's what we've often said in medicine to describe why that is. And all the drug companies that produce diabetic drugs, they are clustered into research projects and dealing with these populations in those areas. Now let's go over across the border to Tarahumaras. How frequent is diabetes there? Non-existent. Same genes.
Just expressed differently.
We're just not feeding them all the stuff we feed in reservation food. Right. The high fat, high sugar, high refined carbohydrate, high alcohol, which then takes those genes, and what they have are what some people have called thrifty genes. What is the biggest threat historically over hundreds and hundreds of years to those populations? It's starvation. They're nomadic people. They would pick up and move their villages. And so getting food was not easy, pretty hostile environment. So their genes over many, many generations developed the ability to hold on to calories because they never knew when they might not get their next meal. So they have these thrifty genes. They convert calories of eating into controlled energy. And what is fat? It's stored energy. So now what happens if you take those thrifty gene individuals and you feed them huge amounts of empty calories? What you've done is you just flooded their genes with too much abundance of junk. Right. So they're storing that all, and now you have morbid obesity in that population. So the genes that we say are diabetogenic are not. The genes that they have are for survival that they've had that adapted to those hostile environments that we then just feed them a angry bit of information.
Right. And that has to express itself because it's been building that way for a long time. So it doesn't have the ability to understand the difference of that calorie in at that point because evolutionarily it's so small of a time period.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and
in fact, John Service, who was the leading public health service physician in the early 1900s in the United States, that was servicing the Pima reservations back at the turn of the last century, and he did a study. I think this was like 1917. He did a study to examine how many diabetics there were in the Pimas in 1917 when they were first kind of putting on the reservations, and he could only find 2 cases. So that same group of people, now we roll forward to today, we have over 80% of them after 40 who are diabetic.
Is that discussion happening in that population? It's
Yes,
certainly
it is.
It's starting to happen where it's going, hey, it's what we're feeding.
The problem is there were subsidies of the foods on those reservations that were feeding into that problem. Yeah. And so, again, we come back to the cultural aspects, the political and economic aspects, and people used to think it's all about the amount of food to prevent starvation, but it's the quality of food.
And then you just extrapolate that and look at the Western world, right? So what's 60 now, maybe 70% of our calories is coming from just created food.
That's right.
And it's like, well, what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah.
So
I think that's it.
And so from your perspective, I love this because, truly food is medicine.
Yeah.
Truly, and you really have built your career on that, not just a flippant quote on social media. It's like, it's like literally if we look at that, right, and we really look at those compounds that are built upon how they've been grown and how extraordinary they are for our bodies, and let nature figure that out. It's kind of like, are you excited right now? I know we talked, off air about how tumultuous this whole landscape is, but there's also some great, at least the conversation of a lot of things happening. So like, you're starting a new business later in your life and like you're still committed. So there has to be some hope and some opportunity that you're seeing. So what are you excited about right now in this space?
Well, when you and I were first talking before we went on air, I had this little soundbite that I'm thinking about right now that it's a metaphor. I said that we're at the edge of the solar system right now as our society, in which the forces of gravity are no longer as powerful as they once were, and so we're not sticking to the Earth as strongly. Mm-hmm. And the only thing that keeps us in a stationary orbit at this point is our love for one another and for our planet. Mm. And so this gives us a chance to pause and reflect, all of us, about what do we want. And for me, at my age, it's all about legacy. We old dudes, our time is gone. So the question is, what are we passing forward? What is our legacy that we will leave? Is it a world that is despoiled and, a few people got rich and a lot of people got injured? Or is it a world that has sustaining value, that's beautiful in all of its diversity, and that we treasure that and preserve it, and work to preserve it, and it has a value, and it makes gainful employment for people that are preserving the integrity of survival and of flourishing of the diversity of our planet? What happened in our economic system with Taylorism, I think, and interchangeable parts and the whole mass production process is that we got things down. Now it's roboticized, where everything was about throughput production of a unit. How many units could you produce per hour? And the more you could produce, the more successful you were. Whatever else happened as a secondary side effect of that, waste or so forth, you don't worry about that. It's all about how many units did you produce at the end. Even in agriculture, how many tons per acre of wheat can you grow, or corn, or
no matter
soy?
How you did it.
That's exactly right. So the other stuff is beside the fact. Now we're starting to see that other stuff that was beside the fact actually is pretty darn important if you are looking at a long-term sustainability. So now, how can we turn around our definitions of success as a society to move from throughput and production in quantity to quality, to move to relationships, to move to sustainability? Because there are all sorts of ways that the human society can find gainful employment working on survivability, not just on throughput.
For sure. I've never met, in the hundreds of indigenous farmers I met around the world, I've never met a people that would work so hard and didn't want to put incredible work into the plants that are endemic to them, that they've passed on from generation to generation. And so like, you build that infrastructure again, and you have it. Like there is a ripe bit of people that want to stay on their land, that want to work their land and want to contribute. And it's like just given that opportunity. But even in the health space, even in the supplements space, they still get squeezed. Yeah. They still get, I mean, look at cacao, for example. It's just a horrible situation, certainly on the Ivory Coast and other places. But it becomes like, well, let's just, how cheap can we make these things? But there is, and I think you've said it several times in the sense that there is this win-win-win-win. Like grow it, build the soil, grow the plants that you're familiar with, and then pay people fairly, process it carefully, and then get it out to people. And
boy, that's the watchword. I get goosebumps just hearing you say that. Yeah. So we were introduced when we started in this targeting buckwheat enterprise. The only person we could find that was growing it in the United States was a former ag research professor from Cornell, Sam Beer, and his wife, who was a nurse. They were both retired, and they had a hobby farm in Angelica, New York. And he, from the USDA, had gotten these magic seeds, sounds like a Jack and the Beanstalk story, that they started growing. That turned out to be this Tartary buckwheat, this 3,000-year-old food. And so they had this small farm, and then they put a little artisanal mill together, and then they would make flour. His wife was a chef and a cook, and so they go to roadside stands in the summer. This was their kind of retirement thing. And they would talk to people and sell the flour. And so I got to know the Beers very well, remarkable people. And eventually he said, it's getting cold up here in the winters. We're getting older. We want to be with our grandkids down in Florida, so we're probably going to sell the farm. So I said, okay, how about if we then bought the farm? Well, then he introduced us to a much larger organic farmer, larger not in size, but in the size of his farm. And we then really got immersed with the production at scale of organic Tartary buckwheat. These farmers that we put a cooperative together of 5 farms in upstate New York, and the stewardship of their soil, the stewardship of their crops, it almost brought me to tears of the first year because Tor, our lead farmer now, took on growing this with 100 acres to start. And he didn't know anything about growing this at all. And he said, this is kind of a challenge. This will be kind of cool to try something new on my farm. And that, when it germinated and blossomed, and he could see these beautiful little flowers, and the whole thing was floral, smelling, he said, man, I love this crop. This is just so aesthetically beautiful. Then we brought in Emily Reese, our PhD soil scientist that was working on the soil, reconditioning. And now I started to see these people don't just have their hands in the soil. They have their hands in the future. They have their hands in survivability. And so we then got the benefit vicariously to be pulled into this whole thing about what does this cycle really look like. And this is one of my moments of great pride. We pay a premium for our farmers to grow this crop. And one of our farms, I didn't know it at the time, but they were a young family, were the farmers, and they were under threat to lose the farm because of a loan that they weren't unable to pay because of the decreasing price of the crops they were growing. But with growing our product, which we paid a premium, they were able to pay off the loan and maintain their family farm. So all this works on so many different levels. It just is amazing to me to see how this can be a different way of approaching the system.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When you do the right thing, right? If you support people and what they know to do, want to do, there's no one's left out.
Yes.
Like everyone gets to thrive, and you talked about it, like the love that you now have for your own growers, the growers' love for their soil and for their plant, and then the transition of this complex, beautiful buckwheat gets to then express itself into people's bodies.
Exactly.
Like that's the cool thing. Like when 20 years ago, when the light bulb went off, I'm sure you've had these moments and you're looking at a package or a product. And I'm like, okay, it's saying all this stuff. And I know many labs, and I started testing stuff, and you're like, it's nothing's in there.
Yeah.
It's not even active anymore. So then it's like, okay, well, who's growing it? Where are they growing it? How are they processing it? And then you find yourself in this journey of like, it's horrifying. sometimes, because also indigenous people are put in these situations, making it impossible for them to actually do some of the things that they know to do.
That's right.
And so, but it becomes like, okay, I'm not going to cut this tree down in the Amazon to pay my family. I'm going to harvest acai and this stuff happens all the freaking time.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't pay that premium,
Yes.
then the loss of the Amazon largely isn't always just, as an example, isn't just bulldozers coming. It's impossible. Like you have pirates and they're selling this 5,000-year-old tree for $5.
Yes.
And that's where that proliferation of getting back to let's farm. Hell, our country was built on farmers. Our country was built on this absolutely sustainable, let's take the ag waste, let's make ethanol, let's use the ethanol to put in our tractors. And then, I don't know, I have maybe, some issues with what was prohibition about. Like, you know what I mean? You start looking at all this stuff. It wasn't about drinking. It was about controlling a farmer. So it's these farmers have been just under tremendous pressure. And obviously we know the challenge of these farmers and the death rates of suicide and all of that stuff is huge in farming communities around the world, and India and everything else. And it is the result of people not doing what we're talking about, not doing what you're saying. And like, there's so many amazing plants. There's so many amazing opportunities to do this and do it right. And then, sometimes people have to get used to a non-subsidized food. In this instance, you're selling some things that are higher premium, but you're getting 120 compounds of bioactive material.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like that's where the inflation of volume food as opposed to nutrient-dense food. We have to continue to educate against that thing. So it's like I love it, man. I love that.
I'm so inspired by what you're saying and how you say it. I mean, you're a master. That's exactly what I'm trying to do with this phase of my work in my life, and you've said it beautifully.
Well, it's not without a lot of plane rides and bumpy roads. And I at one point I was in a car in another country every 6 weeks.
Wow.
Going, where's that person? What are they doing? How do we do that? And you get some success of some formulas out there, and next thing you know, you're like, okay, that's the engine. So let's make sure that these people are always taken care of, and let's not let that profits become the dictator of all of this stuff. And that's the infrastructure. And I think, how would you approach the agrochemicalized agriculture right now? Like what are some of those things that we can start to do? I mean, aside from an individual, it's tough for an individual in the bread belt of America to understand that, hey, I'm busy. I need to put food on the table. How do we start to wake them up to this? There's like these two paths. One is if you're going to continue to eat this food that is largely unregulated with the crap in it. And then this other path where it's like, I'm going to spend a little more money, potentially, to then get nourishing food and or maybe grow some food or grow some sprouts for 25 cents on your countertop. Like, do something. What do we do to I mean, it's a constant. I'm from Minnesota. Like, I'm from that. Like, I always listen from my brother. My brother, has never been on an airplane before. So I listen through his lens. And it's like, but common sense makes sense. So when I talk to him, like, hey, if you grow some food, which he does, it doesn't have glyphosate. It doesn't have all of these very destructive. Those things make sense.
Yes.
You go, like, okay, I can understand that. So what are some of your kind of ideas and thoughts of how do we get food as medicine actually at scale back into this country? I mean, it's a massive question, I realize, but but you're here, and I have to.
Well, I think you're hitting on it beautifully. I don't have a magic wand, and I certainly don't have clairvoyance, but I have been in the field now for 50 years. So, what does my experience tell me? So when I first started, I was a university professor for 15 years, starting from 70 to 85, and I had the fortune of inviting a lot of thought leaders to come in and lecture at the university. I was the head of the lecturers program for the university. And those people were like Buckminster Fuller, and he had to spend a couple nights in my home with me, and Adele Davis, early on, and a whole variety of different people. I was in the chemistry department, but this was the start of Earth Year in 1970, when I was hired. So I was in charge of the environmental science program as well as teaching biochemistry. Wow. And so this experience taught me all sorts of things that you so eloquently have been describing. But I recognize that the standard fare of understanding was pretty low about how these things really worked. Francis Moore-Lepay was one of my favorite people that I invited in 71 to spend a week with us and talk about Diet for a Small Planet and the balancing of grains and legumes and all this kind of stuff about the 40 pounds of vegetables are required to make 1 pound of animal meat, and what that means in terms of energy and impact upon the environment. All those things were part of my education, and I recognized it was a heavy lift to get people to really understand this at a systems level. But the good news is, my encouraging thought is that now, from 1970 to today, so that's 50, going on 55 years, we have seen tremendous strides, particularly the last 10 years, in waking up to these concepts. And I'm going on to the Natural Foods Expo, which will have over 85,000 people attend that meeting. Now, if you go up and down the aisles of these natural food products, you'll find some of them that exaggerate claims and they're not authentic. But there is a cohort of people that started the Organic Standards Act, that started recycling, that started sustainability, that's authentically concerned about plastics in the environment and microplastics and blah, blah, blah. That is a growth. When we started the expo, I was at the first one with Doug Green, who was the guy that started it, and there were 6,000 people and 300 exhibitors. Now there's 85,000 people and I don't know, several thousand exhibitors that have different products in this sector. My company, Big Bold Health, has partners called S2G Ventures that are a sustainable ag and food tech investment company that's looking at new technologies that are sustainable and new ways of stewarding businesses of people like us, starting out to create a different model. And they have $1.5 billion fund to do that. So we're starting to see early stage traction, I guess. Now, can it accelerate? Can we get into the hockey stick of growth? I think we can, maybe by necessity, if it's not by volition. And so I am encouraged. I look at my grandchildren who are totally more knowledgeable about these things than I was at their age, and they're concerned and they're active and they're doing the right things, I think, in terms of sustainability, much different than probably I at that age of high school age to college age. So I think that there are signs. With that said, we have this global community where not everybody has the same fortune that we have in the United States and can have the exposure to the things that we have here. So we have to simplify this to make it usable to people that don't have the same economic standard of living that we enjoy in the United States. But most of these things that you described don't require a lot of expensive stuff. Growing good things in the soil with good soil is not that expensive. The technologies we have today for harvesting and creating products from those are now much more cost efficient and energy efficient. Now we get to sustainable energy, hopefully, getting away from carbon-based footprints to like you probably know the story that historically the amount of oil that's required to grow one potato is equivalent in the weight of the oil to the potato. That was the old model of mechanized farming.
Wow.
You grow potatoes from oil. And so, you say, well, how does that work? Well, all the tractor and the this and the chemicals and all of that, the trucks for transporting. So now we're looking at this in an entirely different way. So I am encouraged, but it's going to require people like you. It's going to have to be a mass transformational reality about what are we really doing and where is the value proposition to life? Because right now we have, as you said, suicide and depression and anxiety and drug addiction. And where do those things come from? Why? Why do people's lives so valueless that they have to seek solutions out of a simple molecule that takes over their soul?
Right.
And that's a pretty powerful concept. If you look at the eyes of a cocaine addict, you can choose any addictive drug, but I just choose that because I have some experience in working in that community. If you look at their eyes, they haven't just been addicted to their somatic cells. Their soul has been stolen. And they're no longer in control. Yeah. There's something else in their eyes.
Yeah, they're not there.
And this is like a small molecule that's taken over that being. Yeah. It's like the worst kind of outcome. So how we fight back against that? We produce value for people. We put love and respect and admiration and collegial connection and communication and cooperation, and we recognize that those value propositions fill in all sorts of holes that we have that we're seeking artificial ways to try to fill.
God damn, that was beautifully said. I love that because it's like when you're saying all that, it feels like an impossibility to change it all, but at the same time, we just have to do it. We have to. You have to start where you're at with your new company. I have to start it's just do the next right thing. Yeah. And I like you. I'm seeing more and more people showing up with capital, with money. Like there is a magnetic field of us coming together, without a doubt. And the old earth will probably continue, like in some junky position and bounce down the road and continue to try to extract everything it possibly can. But at the same time, creating, and you go back to what you said before, this legacy side of things. It's like, well, on a soul level, I'm just going to go until I expire in this life, because on a soul level, I'm just going to, I have to continue to express this because it's necessary, it's required, it's a remedy to these broken systems, or these systems that we all, in one respect, were born into several systems that didn't have the betterment of society or in the environment or people. Right? So it's like, okay, well, what can we correct and who can we attract and what kind of steps can we take to just do something better? Because at the end of the day, I think looking in the mirror and saying, hey, I'm just going to keep going. Yeah. And what else are we going to do with our time here? And hopefully people along the way will come with us and make some choices. Because I know for you, you've probably had several people come up to you and say, you changed my life with the things that you said and the things you educated and the research you've done. It's like that. I'd rather be on that side than squeezing out a profit of some farmer in West Africa and then selling some poison to people. It's like I don't understand. Like, my small town Minnesota brain is still in there. I don't get how people consciously make those choices, because there is a person making those choices in those big corporations. There's someone, is not just this corporation who's just deciding we're just going to keep spraying PFAS on everything. Yeah. There is someone making those choices, and that's the shocking side of humanity, that kind of shadow side. You're like, wow, you've justified that in some form or fashion. You've justified that, and I don't have an answer for that. I am shocked at some of that stuff, but again, we just keep doing the right thing.
Well, I have maybe it's a Pollyannish view about this, but I'll just share a thought. So we're born from the matching of maternal and paternal genes to produce this single cell that ultimately replicates into all these different cells that make us up. From a single bit of information, we become this polycelled organism. And what that ovum, what that fertilized egg represents its potential energy. And now we go over time of our life and we process energy. Energy comes in from our food. Energy then gets processed into different ways. And energy is agnostic. It can be constructive or destructive. So a person's life can be measured somewhat, I believe, in how they partition energy over the course of their life. All of us have some form of energy that goes probably destructive. But we also have the opportunity to take energy and create constructive things, build things that have enduring value, relationships, all sorts of things can be constructive energy. Now, let's say we get to the end of our life and we die. So now we're just dust in the wind, so to speak. But did our energy go away? And we all know the principles is that energy is conserved. It changes form, but it never goes away. The energy of the universe stays constant. Now, what did we put into the universe as a consequence of those few years that we lived, that century we lived? We put some kind of energy that was a balance between destructive and constructive forces. It builds something of a legacy. We're well beyond the somatic cells of our life. We are creating an energy architecture for some kind of a composition that leads to something better, something bigger. So if you think of your life as a pass-through, to be an energy conduit to something that you want to see the future to look like, then each day you have that chance to make that decision, whether you're alive or dead. And that is a really, I think, powerful, for me, driving force. Then you say, well, how does that translate into, say, your spiritual belief system? How does that translate into, what we codify in culture called religion? All of those things are part of the underpinning why we had cave paintings and why people from early hominids were concerned about something bigger than the day, bigger than themselves. And those are the questions that give you the reality to what you're talking about. They create the social transformations. I mean, I think of things like, would we have believed if we were in the 1800s that there would be an airplane, that there would be a computer, that now we take it so for granted. We say, well, that's impossible. Impossible, you're going to take that heavy bit of metal and you're going to put it up there and travel from continent to continent. That's impossible.
You're going to sit on a chair with Wi-Fi.
That's right. Precisely. And so now when people say, can you transform society by redirecting energy into creative positivity from destructive negativity? Yes, we can do that.
Yeah.
It's real. It can happen.
God, I love that. And going back to health too, you can build your health to then beget more energy.
That's right.
To then live your, as I call, a super life. Like, what do you want your life to be? If you didn't have the challenges of the body, who are you? What do you stand for? What do you want? And even having that, and you're not even perfect getting there, even holding that out is your carrot to kind of this, I love that path, the constructive or destructive part. Like, okay, if I'm in this constructive flow of life, who am I? What am I? What am I exemplifying? What am I choosing for everything?
Here.
Yeah.
So you're now talking actually why, against my wife's bitter wishes, we started Big Bold Health, because I thought I have a responsibility to, I've had the joy, pleasure, and gift of traveling 6 million miles in my life, meeting all these incredible people like you, trying to codify that information as some kind of a sensible thing that I can get my arms around. And would it be not very selfish? I just passed on and didn't have some way of passing that forward in some way. So that's Big Bold Health. And then that's learning, being introduced to farmers. And that's then getting Himalayan tartary buckwheat. And then that's learning that if we sprout tartary buckwheat, we enhance its nutritive value. Right. All these things happen just by an intention and purpose to be present.
Yeah. And you've laid such an incredible legacy in just saying, you Buckminster Fuller and all these people that you've come in contact with. And then the transmutation of all of that interaction and knowledge and continue to express it. Like, I'm grateful for what you've done. I'm grateful for all that you've done. I'm grateful for all the things you will continue to do.
Well, thank you.
And I'm just stoked to have met you, and it's about time.
Well, I feel the same way. So it's a mutual admiration. Thank you.
Well, thank you for jumping on here, and I think we're going to have many other discussions.
I look forward to it.
Yeah, man.
Thanks.
Thank you. Wow.
Okay. That was fun. That was really fun.
I can't stop. I could not. I had to stop myself because I know we got the second Jeff coming, and I was in my head going, yeah, but I there's so much here.
Well, you got a great Jeff coming. I think a world of Jeff Kressman.
Oh, he's the best.
He is the best.
He's the best.